Hello, welcome to the Talking Basketball podcast. I am Mark.
I am Paul. Hello.
Paul, we've got a guest with us today.
We have got arguably the greatest guest we've ever had on the show.
Arguably the greatest.
From my perspective, definitely one of the greatest guests we've had on the show.
Paul, does it get better than this?
It possibly does not get better than this, Mark. So without any further ado whatsoever, now stand and cheer for your voice of British basketball, Dan Routledge.
Well, that is an intro right there.
Yeah, Dan.
I wasn't expecting that.
There you go.
How you doing, Dan?
I'm very well. Good to be here.
We need to get that on Sky Sports and on YouTube, don't we?
Gotta have, surely, you must think, like, I do intros or I talk to people and you comment and you think, he does one for me. There you go, Dan. You got
There
it.
you go.
We'll cut it out, you can have it.
I'm gonna have to get my wife to do that when I get home. That's what it is.
Have it on the front door every time you open the door, just like, that's the doorbell, isn't it?
Every time
Yeah,
Mark
yeah.
rings you, no.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Can I just say for all of us, we even said on the air, as soon as you jumped in and you said, hey guys, it's like, that's weird because you're on the telly. And then you said, hello, and it's like, it's the same voice. And I don't know why I thought it'd be different, but yeah, the voice of British basketball.
Yeah, I can't do it. I can't switch it off, unfortunately.
It sounds brilliant. I like just listen to it. I'm like, yeah, let's go. We'll listen to basketball. Well, Dan, just like I would just say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I know I'm speaking on behalf of Mark as well as myself when I say this. It's not every day that we get to speak to people we really look up to in the media industry, and for someone who's had such an amazing basketball career, especially, it is an absolute privilege to be speaking with you today. And you know what, we really admire like your work and what you've done in the industry.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I had the word tenured written down. It wasn't as eloquent as he put it, but then I realized tenured sounds like you're old. And you're not old.
Well, unfortunately,
but you've just been
ticked that
doing it a
box
long
as
time.
Well, yeah.
So you started doing this pretty young, didn't you?
I did, yeah. So I started out on Sky Sports. I think I was about 24, 23 when I first started out on Sky Sports, but I'd been doing it on local cable TV and that beforehand. So probably the first thing I ever did, I did the PA. I was a courtside announcer in the beginning, and I think I was about 15 or 16 when I first did that. Started doing some radio stuff at about 18, and then the TV stuff probably about 19. And it was just the love of basketball, really. It was one of those things. Is I was a basketball fan. I was obviously involved, and things came up. It was like, you could do that, so I just did. I didn't quite know where it would all lead to, but I enjoyed doing it at the time, and I still do now.
But do you think it's like when you started back then, was there anything, I won't say guiding you, but like you said, you love the game, so you rolled into that, but was there any guidance at that point between, you said like 16 you're doing that, and then at 19 you're on the radio? Like what were these jumps like? Because
I don't think there was. No, I don't remember anything other than someone going, you could do that, and then just started doing it, sort of thing. When I started at Sky, we did have some training going on with the late great Ed Percival, and he I remember going down to Isleworth, and myself and Kevin Caleb were starting on Sky Sports at the same time, and we did a lot of stuff with Ed, because he was training up. I think Sky Sports News had just started, maybe in its first year or something, and he'd done a lot of that training with them. So he gave us a few tips and pointers, which were certainly very helpful. And he was very helpful to me in general, both before I became on Sky Sports as the commentator and after. But no, I think in the beginning it was just start talking, basically. Here's a microphone, start talking, and it wasn't quite straightforward. I remember the first time I did PA, the first sentence I said was "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," but I didn't manage to get it out quite as cleanly as that. And it was like, oh, please swallow me up, I can't do this. And it probably took me a couple of years, I would say, with the PA before I started to feel like, oh, actually I could just keep going.
So a bit of fate, really. The way you're describing it feels like fate.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's elements of being the right place at the right time, but I guess that happens to everybody, doesn't it? Whatever you do, if you do something for a long period of time, there will be times where you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, in front of the right people, and then once you get there, you have to be able to be good at it. You know what I mean? To keep going 20 whatever years it is later, sort of thing, because if you're not, they find somebody else who'll do it instead of you, sort of thing. So yeah, there probably is an element of fate along the way. Yeah.
And I would say it's even more meaningful that someone like yourself is in the position you're in. And the reason I say that is because dominantly in basketball and media, if you look who's doing it, it's ex-players, ex-coaches and things like that. So to get someone who, and I'm not saying this with any disrespect to anyone who's doing it, but forget someone who's not played at a competitive level to his then doing that and taking ownership of that and being professional is a massive deal, I think. Massive deal.
And also it didn't really seem like an option when I started out. It didn't seem like you would ever. Nowadays, I think it's much easier to think, you know what, I want to be a basketball commentator, or I want to be a football commentator, or I want to be whatever, because there's a lot more saturation of sport in general. Whereas when I started, there wasn't really. There was the Sky Show, and that was it. There was no YouTube or, you know, various streaming platforms or anything like that. So it didn't seem like a realistic prospect. Even when I started doing the local cable TV stuff, at about 19, and it was just, you know, somebody asked me to do it and I enjoyed doing it, so I'd do it. But I didn't really think, in 25 years time, 30 years time, I'm still going to be doing this. So it's sort of again, you just sort of keep going until somebody tells you to stop, I guess.
I mean, look, you said about being fate in the right place and the right time. I recall being back at, say, you know, in my 20s, vaguely. And I don't remember a time when I was sat commentating for Sky Sports next to the late, great Kevin Cadle. That moment in my life seems to have passed. So I didn't get that bit when I was sort of, you know, that age. I mean,
that's
Kevin,
quite a huge podium to go on to at a
you're
young
there
age,
commentating with Kevin Cadle. At that point, was it a case of you'll be doing this with Kevin, or did you get there and go, oh, that's who I'm doing it with?
No, I knew, because it's basically Kevin and I started at the same time, and so when I was hired, I was told Kevin was going to be fronting the show, and I knew Kevin a bit anyway through basketball, but you're right, there was that sort of moment of, it's Kevin Cadle, and I grew up, you know, watching basketball, and Kevin was, you know, the great coach of that era. And, you know, his team were the team that everybody else hated because they won all the time and that sort of thing. But yeah, I was a little bit sort of like, wow, Kevin Cadle. But to be honest with you, he's one of the nicest blokes I've ever met in my entire life. So you can't stay like that very long, because he's so down to earth and just a wonderful human being. And the other thing was, we were both starting out doing that. He'd obviously never really done any broadcasting either, so we were on a bit of a learning curve together, which certainly helped along the way as well.
And we got to talk about the volume of noise you guys have in your headset as well. I don't know if people are aware of this, but you put a video out there a while ago, and it was just like, oh my God, I was getting confused, thinking, wow, I don't know if you got a code name or whatever, but it was just like the volume of chatter that's going on in your headset, and then all of a sudden, 3, 2, 1, bam, Dan, you're on. Like, and we're back in Cheshire further. It's like, that feels confusing just listening.
Yeah,
to
it's
that.
funny because I've over the years I've sort of told people, oh, you got all these people talking and blah blah blah, and nobody ever quite understood it. And one day I said to one of our sound tech guys, I went, how hard would it be to record this if I wanted? And he went, well, if you had a device and you could just plug it into that socket there, it would record. And and you're away sort of thing. And I was like, oh, okay, then I'll just try that next week. And I tried it and it came out and it was like, this is actually pretty good. And I put it out, and even like my mum and my wife were like, how do you manage with all of that noise? But I think what it is you learn when people are not talking to you, and it's sort of like you're almost half listening to them. And for me, I find it slightly weird doing it without anybody talking, because it throws me off, like I'm not really on. It's like you're not doing proper telly if nobody's talking to you. And also that thing of, well, how do I know what's coming next? Because I listen to the director talking to the cameras, so therefore I know, oh, we're going to go to the baseline camera, or there's a replay coming, or there's a graphic just come on the screen and I'm not looking at it, so I ought to see what that is, sort of thing. So it's little cues as to what's going on. But
I've got it here. Here you go.
Oh, it's very much in the balance. Comes like 32, 2. Welcome back to Portsmouth Force, about to get underway for the second quarter here. I'm out here in the second.
That's a lot going on, isn't it? I don't think
I'd
people
be throwing my
realise
headset
that.
straight, like, shut up and just throw the headset out. I'm done.
You'd be tempted to like at least do
Yeah.
one ear, wouldn't you?
The funny thing is that those two, the director and the PA that you can hear on that, are actually a married couple. So sometimes they'll be talking about who's taking the child to swimming tomorrow, sort of thing. And you've got to tune.
Dan, you're on. You should be talking. Stop
But
listening to
occasionally,
us.
because I can talk back to them, which the bit I couldn't record was me talking back to them. So they'll say something, and I'll then answer back to them whilst Ant or whoever is talking, and then just carry on. But I think what happened was, the year before I started on Sky, I'd done some floor managing for them. So basically going there and telling people about substitution, or making sure the rest didn't start the game before we'd come back from break, and all of that sort of thing. And that was the first time I ever put the headset. Well, it's not quite the first time, but it was the first time in television I'd ever put the headset on. And it was just like, wow, who are all these people? And I just assumed they were talking to me. And I learnt my lesson very early on, that they weren't always talking to me. And if they're screaming, why haven't the lights come back on? If you answer, then it's your fault, and therefore you'll get the full brunt of it. So when they're not shouting at you, don't say anything. They might be shouting at the cameraman over there on the baseline, and you can just watch him. But I remember actually when I was young, my dad did some stuff for Centre Radio, I think it was called at the time. It was a local independent radio station, and Keith Daniel was the local sports correspondent, and he took me to a football game. And I remember they used to do back into the studio. They didn't do live commentary, but they used to do bits back into the studio. And he'd give me a pair of headphones, and I can't remember what age I was, probably 9 or 10. I was in primary school, definitely. And it just blew my mind that I could hear somebody talking to me that wasn't going out on the radio, and I could hear the records they were playing, and they were like, they're going to come to you in 15 seconds, and then it would come over, and then Keith would do his bit and he'd go back. And that was probably the first time I experienced that whole other voices going on, and it just sort of mesmerized me. But yeah, definitely the floor managing was the thing that allowed me, when I started doing commentary, to know when they're not talking to you. And sometimes you'll miss something and they'll have to come back to you a second time because I was actually paying attention to what Rose said to me or whatever. But most of the time you can sort of filter it all through.
Did it ever go like really quiet at any point and all the noises stop, and then you realise, hang on, I'm supposed to be talking? Or are they all talking whilst you're still doing
yeah,
the
they're all
commentary?
talking while I'm still doing it. And actually, if it was to go silent...
That's hard. That would be so hard.
If it were to go silent, I would assume something had gone wrong. I would assume there was no... And actually, this year, doing the coverage for the British Basketball League, quite a lot of the times, the director would turn themselves off because not everybody likes it. And I was like, well, no, can I have open talk back? Because I can't tell what's going on in the show if I can't hear you talking to the cameras and to the VT people and whatever. I need to hear all of that to know what's about to come, and then I can link. Because if I can hear him talking to the replay guy about getting a replay for that, I can start to lead to that before the replay comes, so that when the replay comes, I've hit it, rather than I'm in the middle of waffling about something else and then a replay comes in and I have to go, oh, and here's something different. So to me, it's a help to how you navigate your way through the show. And I get all of those sort of audio cues from the director and the producer. And the producer will be telling you, right, coming up, we're at the end of this quarter, we're going to have a 30-second wrap, and then we're going to go to the break, and then we'll come back with this, and this.
How dare you be considerate and mindful of the people watching? How dare you very much?
But it's interesting how Dan can filter out that, but take it in at the same time, as well as talking about the game to his fellow commentator.
I know this is going to sound really
all at the same time.
Weird,
that's a big challenge.
Yeah, if I can make a sporting connection with that, have you ever listened to the overheads with the Formula One?
I don't think I have.
So when they're doing that, it's they're driving at 160, 170 miles an hour, and they're like, you've got to take the brake ballast down to 6. You've got to do this on the suspension, lock this up on there, do that. And you go, dude, I'm driving a rocket at like 200 miles an hour, and while I'm doing this and fighting G-forces and everything, someone's in my ear going, this guy's up at this position, this guy's, and it's like, like
well,
Paul said,
the worst,
multiple strains of information.
The worst that would happen if I get it wrong is Ant asks me a question and I just ignore him. I'm not crashing the car. It's not too dangerous.
But still, that's a lot going on. You're doing that, and would you call yourself a color commentator, or how would you?
No,
I think it's play-by-play color. Is it? Do they still do it like that?
I've done some color over the years, and I actually started out. The first thing I ever did was color commentary.
So just for our listeners, can you tell us the difference between play-by-play and color?
The way I always talk to people about it is they get the first half of the shot clock and I get the second half of the shot clock, if you like, or they get the back court and I get the front court sort of thing. My job is to tell you what's happened, literally as it's happening, and the color is there to add color and tell you why it happened or how it happened or what could be done to prevent it from happening in the future and all of that sort of thing. So my job is just to navigate you through the game as to who scored and when, sort of thing, and then the colors are usually coaches or ex-players, so they can give you that insight to the game that from that perspective that mere mortals like the rest of us wouldn't necessarily have. But as I say, I've done some over the years, and I do quite enjoy it because I know what it's like to sit in the left-hand chair, if you like. I know what you need to do in the right-hand chair, so it's that sort of it's fun when they let me go, and you can have a bit more of an opinion and stuff like that. So and say, aren't they rubbish? Whereas as the play-by-play, you're supposed to be a bit more down the line.
But this is the really key thing for me, and a good commentator, you need to know what you're talking about. It's really vital. You need to know what you're talking about. And I suppose when you're talking like from play-by-play, as whoever gets the ball, you need to know every single player on that team like that, don't you? You need to know everyone. This is a really basic example I'm giving. But within half a millisecond, the ball's gone to Mark Chester and he's passing to Dan Routledge. He's looking for that through, or whatever. But you need to be able to pick that up. So you need to know every single player in the entire BBL.
Yeah, in that instance, my hands would have been up and the ball would have gone through them. And and then they'd have been subs. There's a sub and he's off. Yeah.
Even the colour, it's still quite difficult, isn't it? And when I was in Australia and I was with the commentators over there, it was really interesting the notes that they have. So they've got by player, they've got all the notes per player. So
saying, the last 5 games he's done this, and bringing that up, and you think,
what was it called? Siskowski, 7. I remember his note 7-3. And he is looking and going to the NBA draft in 2 years' time, 17 years old, something like that. But they really did their background checks on that. And I think the audience knows whether you have or not.
Yeah, I mean, I've done stuff where you just sort of turn up and go, I don't really know who the hell any of these people are, but you've got to wing it, but you can orderly. I would be able to tell, like when I watch the Olympics and stuff like that, you can tell the people who are commentating off the CIS, which is like a little computer system that they have at the multi-sport events like that, where they click on somebody's thing and they're reading a bio about, this year their personal best this year is whatever, and you're thinking you don't actually know that, versus somebody like Steve Cram, when he says it, he knows that he's not read that off
because he's been there,
because he lives and breathes it and sort of thing. So for me, when I do,
but you can do that because you're at all these games and you'll talk to a player and he'll say something and you'll be using that information in your next show.
I mean, with the BBL, because I've been around for so long, there are things that are just sort of stuck in my head for no real reason, and they'll just pop out at times where I'll say something, and it's just, I just happen to remember that, you know what I mean? It's one of those, somebody says, when did that happen? And I can remember an instance of it because you've been around for so long. But that's just a sign of age as much as
in 1998.
It literally is that sort of thing. But obviously it's more difficult when you do, obviously I do a lot of European games and stuff, so it's harder to keep on top of everything. But again, you do your research week by week into the games, and then you do a team 2 or 3 times and you start to know tendencies and stuff like that. It's much easier now than it was when I started out because everything's on the internet, so it's so easy to find out information about people.
Did you just say the internet didn't exist?
It didn't exist.
Everything
when I started, it was all on paper. Did the internet exist? I think it might have. It's certainly not the wealth of information that there is now. But in the beginning, everything was on paper. Whereas now, it's all on my laptop. I have spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets, and the idea of going back to paper, I just couldn't do it. A lot of people do because they like to highlight things, or they, write things in big and small. And you certainly, when you see the football commentators, they all have their whole team on a sheet. But I've fully embraced modern technology. I do everything off a laptop now, no paper.
Just touching on that, could you explain to some people, say, the difference between, say, basketball and football in terms of like the stats and sheets and stuff that you have in front of you? What sort of data I won't say jumps out at you, but when you're doing the play-by-play and commentary, what sort of stats is it that I won't say leaping at you, but that you would use generally? So
I create, for every game I do, I create my own little stat sheets, which will have all of the information from this season and whatever. I'll have the stuff, season high, career highs, all in a little spreadsheet that I create for every game. And it's easy to click from one bit to the other. Because that's the thing, is if somebody's on the free throw line with 2 seconds to go, you need to know, is he going to make these free throws or not? Now, some of that you'll know in your head that this guy's a terrible free throw shooter and this guy's a really good one. But if you can say, he's averaging 75% from the free throw line this season, but that's down from his career average of 82%, blah, blah, blah. It gives extra information to the audience. And that's kind of the role of it, is to try and tell people. I know I said mine is to tell you what's happened, but also to tell you a bit about the people doing it. I know the British Basketball League this year were big push on storytelling, so you got a lot more of sort of background and personality stuff. But I still think the nuts and bolts of the game, of what they average and what they do and what they've won and what they've not won, and things like that, still are quite important to the narrative and the sort of history. And that's one thing, again, just partly being old and partly being somebody who likes to keep lots of spreadsheets. I've got people come to me and ask me, what's this, or when did that happen, or whatever. So I do have the ability to look things up. There'll be a time where Cheshire scored 32 points in the first quarter, and by the time we come back, I'll be able to say, that's the first time in 4 years they've scored 32 points in the opening quarter of a game. Because
This is a big spreadsheet.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
This is a big spreadsheet.
I guarantee that's the sort of thing Paul would be all over that. Like, he loves stats.
Yeah.
He'd be all over that. But I've got to ask there, on that basis, like Paul says, it's a big spreadsheet. What would you consider the most overrated and underrated stats for basketball? What would you think? People don't actually highlight. The only reason I say that is because you highlighted free throws, and Paul knows anything like 75% and below, they're a villain in my eyes. Get on the bench.
Well, the running
with
theme I've had with Amro for the last couple of years, particularly watching Bristol, is offensive rebounding, because everybody goes, "Oh, aren't they a great offensive rebounding team? Don't they do really well with all these offensive rebounds?" And I go, all they're doing is missing a lot of shots. The object is to score, not to miss a shot and get a rebound and miss a shot and get another rebound. And actually, when you did the metrics of it, their rebounding wasn't quite as great as it looked, simply because they missed more than once. But he will tell you it's about wearing the other team down and blah blah. And I get his argument, and his argument is right. But there is something about that. There's lots of it is kind of overblown, isn't it? But basketball lends itself to statistics, and we can sort of dive into them all over the shop. But there are some times where, even I will put stuff out and people go, well, what does that mean? Because ultimately it's about winning. How many games did you win? And that's the thing, is however you do it. And that's the beauty of sport, isn't it? There's more than one way of winning. Whichever way you do it, as long as you win, that was the right way, isn't it?
Well, one of the unique views that you have over, certainly in British basketball, seeing is that change between the advent of using more data and the amounts of data you can collate and how far you can look back. It's so much more accessible nowadays. So we see now people in coaching and the way that they do things, I won't say like the Moneyball approach, so to speak, but for winning sports, people are looking at, we just want to get these incremental wins, and it's at the end of the day. Do you see that then as
and also it's not just the numbers, it's the tendencies and things like that. It's why it's always insightful when you do the commentary with active coaches. So when I've sat with Rob or with Lloyd or whoever this season, because they've obviously played all of these teams, they've got scout reports on him. So it's like, well, you don't want him to catch the ball there, because if you do, forget it, it's too late. You need to push him out. Or don't let him go left. If he's going left, he's going to spin back right. All of that sort of thing. Because I don't know if you're aware of Synergy, but all the clubs have access to Synergy, which is video analysis basically. So you can just go on and you can put in whatever player you want, and then show me their last 500 mid-range shots. And you can literally watch it over and over again. And I've been at training sessions where they've got it on the big screen and they're running it through of whoever they're playing on Saturday, which is don't let him go right, don't let him go right. And I'm breaking it down a little bit more simplistic than the coaches do, but it's that sort of thing of it's stuff that's probably imperceptible to most of the average fan. But those are the things, is because all you're trying to do is make that guy shoot, instead of shooting where he shoots 60%, can you get him to shoot where he shoots 45%? Because that adds up to 8 points in the course of a game, and that will win you. There's a difference between winning and losing, and it's sort of like the rest of us are kind of miss it, but actually instead of shooting that percentage, he shot this percentage, and the reason he did was because he was taking shots that he didn't want to take, because they just moved him slightly away from where he was comfortable.
And you know what this highlights to me? For Dan, it is great because he's got 30 years of experience with sitting next to some of the greatest minds in British basketball. And that's only going to rub off on you.
I was just thinking you could be the ultimate heckler because you've got like stats like, hey, do you remember like 8 years ago when you absolutely bricked that shot on this game?
I was thinking, there was something else tying into that. Before I do you know what popped in my head? We've got to ask Dan, if he doesn't mind, to do a welcome to Talking Basketball podcast and put it on something.
Yeah, you got to do that.
Dan's got to introduce himself. Dan on the latest episode. That'd be great if he doesn't mind. Anyway, where I was going with this was, what would be amazingly funny if you had a colour commentator who was biased. So you had the play-by-play, and he's like, he's just thrown up another brick. That's 8 in a row.
I've worked with some. I've worked with some who have chosen for whatever reason to throw a specific player under a bus because they didn't really like them. And I'm sort of sitting there going, man, he's killing him. He's killing him here. And obviously the other thing is, over the years, working with coaches who are involved, their team might be affected by what's going out on court, so it's quite hard for them to hide that. I remember the classic example of that was when was it? It was probably late 90s, maybe early 2000s, where Robbie Pears was coaching Chester at the time, and it was the last game of the season. I think it was 1998-9. The last game of the season, Derby were playing away at Newcastle, and if Derby lost, Chester would make the playoffs. But if Derby won, Derby would make the playoffs and Chester would miss out. And Robbie was our colour commentator. So he sat there desperately wanting Derby to lose because he would get in the playoffs, but also knowing that Piero Cameron had gone home the week before because Chester had played all their games and they thought they were going to miss out on the playoffs, but somehow Derby had collapsed, so that it would cost the club $2,000 to fly him back probably for this playoff game. And you could feel it sat next to him, this sort of nervous tension of desperately wanting this team to do everything wrong and fall apart. And they ended up losing the game and they got in, and you got his excitement through all of that. I mean, he did try and curtail it a little bit, but I've worked with people before where there is that direct impact on their outcome if one team or the other loses, and it must be a nightmare to try and maintain a facade of neutrality through all of that.
But it's great. I love it. And the reason I love it is because it's passion, and there is nothing more than listeners can instantly identify with someone being passionate about it.
Look, I am not a football follower in any way, but even I recognise when they show the clips and it's like Ian Wright watching an Arsenal game. And it's like,
yeah.
And you're in the studio and it's like, it doesn't matter. As soon as that clock's on and he's watching the ball, he's going crazy at the telly. They score a goal and it's like he just scored.
In some ways, it's quite good when he's in the studio doing that. But actually, if you're on the commentary, you have to be a little more balanced, and he very rarely is. So the interesting one was I was watching the Scotland game, and James McFadden, I thought, was amazingly down the line when things went against his team. So there was a foul or whatever, and he went, yeah, that's a foul, rather than the natural reaction would be, ref, what are you talking about? Or a yellow card goes against his team, and he goes, that is a yellow, it is a yellow card. And actually, I think that's quite a skill where you do have that, particularly at international level, because we've all got our biases at international level, and that's almost more acceptable, isn't it? But it's that thing of still trying to do the job that you're there. And the other thing you've got to bear in mind is not everybody that's watching your broadcasts wants the same outcome that you do. Even at international level, when England play, 90% of the audience probably wants England to win, but there'll still be 10% of them there who are going, God, I hope they lose. This would be so hilarious if they lose. And you can't just alienate that chunk of the audience just because that's your bias, if you like.
Can you share with us a time where you may or may not have just been, damn, like when something happens in that respect.
My thing was always the GB games. I always found that because I understood the importance of a successful national team to the game in this country. It's super important to have that level of visibility. And obviously there's been various times in the last 10 or 15 years where you're thinking, well, we face oblivion as a sport at the national level if they can't qualify for whatever the next thing is, because UK sport basically don't care and only give us enough money to get by if we somehow manage to make it to a tournament. So when we were doing those games, and I understood the sort of larger political ramifications, and is rooting Great Britain, there won't be that 10% because they just won't be watching. So those were always the hardest ones, where you were thinking, God, like, just for the sake of the future of the sport, we need to win this game here today. And I they're trying to straddle that middle line, perhaps sometimes more effectively than others.
That's got to be a hard
it is.
skill
But the beauty of the British Basketball League is because I've been around for so long, I know people everywhere. So whoever wins, I can always feel happy for somebody, because I know somebody who's enjoying that win, and I know the journeys of all of the clubs, and to me that's kind of the beauty of sport, is that sort of the story of coming from here to there, and the reality of British basketball is just about everybody's been rubbish at some point in their history, and I know people who were there when they were rubbish, so therefore like Cheshire have had their lows and they won the trophy. Caledonia last year, 20 years without winning anything, and Leicester were bottom of the league, Newcastle were bottom of the league, Lions were bottom of the league at various different points. And I know people that were connected and involved and are still connected, involved, or supporters or whatever. So you sort of, whoever wins, you can feel happy for them and that excitement. Whereas at national level, we all support the same team, so therefore we all get depressed if they lose.
Do you have a team you follow?
No, I've been doing this game too long. I obviously live in Leicester and I go to the Leicester games and I've got connections, but I just sit there and watch the game. It's
I think they say
fan of the sport. That's me. Yeah.
And I just want to touch, because we were talking about football. Why have you never looked at the football side of things? Because I imagine it wouldn't be a hard transition for you to do that. So have you ever looked at doing that?
When in the early years I did a few other bits and bobs. I was the Jeff Shreves of a football tournament one summer, and I did some ice hockey and did I do cricket? I got asked to do cricket. I got asked to do tennis. I can't remember if I actually even did them. But to be honest with you, I grew up with basketball. Basketball was my sport. So I always sort of, I became a commentator because of basketball, rather than I was a commentator and then started doing basketball. And nothing against, I know a lot of people who are commentators who do basketball and then they go off and do tennis and they go off and do whatever. But it was the love of basketball that made me a commentator, rather than the love of commentary that drew me to basketball. So with hindsight, I probably picked the wrong sport. I should have tried for football. But again, as I say, I never quite planned to be doing it 25, 30 years later. So it was just the love of the game that kept me going, sort of thing. So I grew up with it. I grew up, my parents both played. I used to get mum subbed out of a game to change nappies and all of that sort of thing. Yeah.
Wow,
yeah. So I was always around it. Never.
Someone was like holding you up, like in The Lion King, like, Sam,
I have no recollection of not going to basketball. That was what we did. So, yeah.
Oh wow! So that really is in your roots, and like you said, you obviously at like
Yeah,
9
yeah.
and you're listening through the headset. I mean, I won't say full circle, but you just,
Yeah,
you live and
basically,
breathe this.
it's one of those afflictions I've passed on to my son now. He's now 18 and plays, and the youngest not so much. But yeah, it's always been there.
Has he ever played and you've been on the side?
I nearly did. I
started
nearly did a
commentating, he's like,
commentary.
"Stop."
For some reason, when he was about 14, 15, for some reason, the coach was streaming this game. And he was like, "Oh, it'd be amazing if you could do commentary for it." And I was like, "Well, I'm coming to watch anyway. Why not?" And I got down there, and whatever headset he got, they couldn't plug it into whatever camera they'd got. So he's like, "Oh, we can't make it work." And I was like, "That's all right. I'll just sit and watch." So I almost had one game of commentating on, but it didn't quite happen. I did. There was one game actually when
That
he
would be
was
awesome.
when he was about 9 or 10. They were playing in a tournament. It was it the final? I think it was the final in Birmingham of whatever competition this was, and not all the parents could make it. So I did I put it out on, was it Periscope or whatever the app of the time was for video sharing. I don't think you could do it on YouTube at those days. And just on my phone, going backwards and forwards. So I was sort of half commentating on that when somebody jacked up at these little 9, 10-year-olds jacking up 3-pointers.
There's another 3. He's got a 0%.
Yeah, he's
Way
been
too
watching
much
Steph
Steph
Curry
Curry
recently and
kids,
decided that
This
I mean,
guy's going to the free throw line for the game. He's 1%. So let's good luck to him.
Well, funnily enough,
arguably
in
Steph's
that
quite a large
tournament, in the
part of sport, isn't he?
semi-finals, the game went down to the last play. Their player missed 2 free throws, and then little Sean got fouled at half court, and the game was tied. And he had 2 free throws, and I thought he was going to pass out. He was so nervous, shaking. He made them both, and they won the game. They piled
good.
on him.
Oh, nice. Well, I've got a really random question now, and this is more of a personal question just for me. I know I speak on behalf of a lot of BBL listeners on the YouTube channels and Sky Sports and stuff like that. I was going to talk to you about, I don't know how to phrase this question, language, I guess is how I'd phrase it. And by that, I mean, when we're watching the BBL, the actual, like, for example, look, Dan, we love your voice. We love the tone of your voice. We love what you're actually saying. Sometimes you'll get like an American, if it's an American commentator, there was one we were talking about. He was a great commentator. What was his name? He did the Eagles London game. Who was that? He was really good. Anyway, sometimes you get this fake American accent that comes in. You must know what I'm talking about, where lots of people do it. And it's one of those things that I always feel from British basketball, it feels odd.
You know what? I think some of it is about linguistics as well, in that, because the terminology of basketball is American, it's quite hard not to sound American to,
like a
to
Muppet.
an English,
when you're saying it in
English
British,
audience, because if they don't know basketball and they don't know the language. So when I'm talking about offense and defense, I'm talking about basketball. If I go down King Power, I'm not going to say Leicester City are on offense and now they're transitioning back to defense. I'm going to talk about attack and defense. And again, they're the same words in essence, but one has a natural American sounding because it's an American word.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element of that.
That's why I said to you.
Where the linguistics of it are by their very nature American because of the popularity of the game coming in.
Yeah, that's the example I said to you was defense. You're allowed to.
Yeah.
That sounds better than defense.
Because if you say defense,
that-
people will
but
think you don't know what you're talking about. They'll make a judgment.
Yes.
People will make a judgment on how you phrase something. I even had people who are going, "It's not a match, it's a game," and it's like, okay, it doesn't really matter, but people get upset if you don't call it a game of basketball.
I think the
What do they do in tennis again? Is it a game of tennis? No, it's a tennis match.
I think the bit of language, I'm trying to give it. I've got a good example. This is one of the ones I'm not a huge fan. When I hear it, I'm just like, is the word asked. Do you know that one? I asked them, and I'm like, man, that's a real and American thing. I think asked, or if you're a northerner, so you're above London, it'll be asked, isn't it? Usually, but it's the asked. It's very American, all around London, isn't it?
I think it comes down to who the commentator is and who the audience is for that particular show. Like Dan said earlier, like if you're doing something for England, for the English listeners, no one from, say you're playing Italy, no one from Italy is listening to that. Like they're not listening. So it's like you can talk and use phrasing that people would be more used to. Whereas what would you do, for example, in EuroLeague? That sort of things, because so we're talking about defense. What do you do there? Because
you just said defense, Mark. You mean defense?
There is an element of that as well, because I know
I'd say on D.
When in the early years of when we were on the BBC, we used to get told, "Can you make sure you explain everything to people?" And I always have that balance of nobody ever explains rugby to me. When I watch rugby on TV, nobody ever explains what the rules are, other than the crazy minutiae that unless you played rugby for 15 years, you wouldn't know. They don't, it's like, they don't say, oh, you get, 4 points for a try and you get 3 points for a drop goal and they don't explain any of that. And yet we were almost being asked to explain it to a completely uninitiated audience. And I get it, particularly on the BBC, because you might well get uninitiated audiences. But my take of it is that actually the nuance we need to explain, and let's be honest with you, I sit with players who don't know the rules, so I'm having to tell them, no, actually that's wrong, you're wrong on that, this is what the rule is. And I don't know everything, but I try and keep on top of the rule changes, and I get it wrong sometimes, and a referee will pick me up on it. I'll get a phone call or a message saying you were wrong on that, by the way. But you get the balance.
Wow.
But I want them to be fair. If I get something wrong because I've misunderstood a rule, then I would rather somebody contact me and tell me that I got it wrong than just to leave me to get it wrong again the next time and the next time and the next time. But yeah, going back to the point it was like how you describe the game and how you explain it. And there are times where I will explain a few rules here or there, depending on the audience, that I wouldn't, if you're watching on the British Basketball League YouTube channel, you've not happened across that. You've chosen to go there and watch that. So you will have some interest in basketball and therefore some understanding. So I don't need to pitch it too low, versus if you're on terrestrial TV. When we were doing the GB games on Channel 4, I pitched my explanation at a slightly lower level, because there will be people who were watching this because it's on before Sunday Kitchen or after Sunday Kitchen, whatever we were. I remember we were on the Sundays.
If they're watching basketball on Channel 4,
what was the example?
I know. That's literally all I was thinking in my head. But if they're watching on Channel 4, they're just
they're going back to Mars
Akins
and Simon Reed.
Exactly, they're going back there. I'm thinking of Claire Balding when she did the when Jordan's first comeback game. Do you remember that?
I have a vague recollection of it.
And that was Claire. That was, and I'm not throwing her under the bus.
You felt sorry for her because it was like she'd never watched a basketball game before, and it was like, so a 3-pointer has been scored and it was like, wow, you don't know the game.
Jordan's comeback game, but I won the bet because I said he's going to throw an air ball, and he did throw a shot. It's like, yeah, but again, that's an example of, obviously you've got the contract, you're a commentator, you'll be able to do this, and you go, actually, it raises a bigger point, I guess, in that. As you're saying, with basketball and the perception of basketball in the UK particularly, why is there a need for people to be educated?
Well, Yeah.
because there is such a
Well,
big
my
fan
take
base,
on it,
and it's
honestly, is number one, the worst thing that ever happened to basketball in this country was the Harlem Globetrotters. That is my hill, and I will die on it. The Harlem Globetrotters were all over the telly in the late 70s and early 80s, and then when you would say anything at basketball after that, even to this day almost, people go, "Oh, like the Harlem Globetrotters." You go, "No, that's a circus. It's not real sport." But that was their framing. So the framing of basketball in this country is that it's an American sport played by tall blokes, basically. And when you say, well, yeah, it is. There are tall blokes and there are Americans that play, but actually there are an awful lot of Europeans that play, and actually there's a lot of Asia plays the game. In fact, other than football, it's the biggest team sport in the world, and it's not a million miles behind football, not in terms of number of people in venues, but in terms of participation by country and the like. And people struggle to understand that. They struggle to know that, you know, Real Madrid and Barcelona have massive basketball teams where people are getting paid millions of euros to play basketball. They don't have any idea of that. And I think that's one of the drawbacks, is that we just go, oh, it's an American sport, not interested in it. And again, you go back to Olympic coverage, you just go, oh, it's an American sport, not interested. But we'll spend a lot of time on relatively niche English/British sports. So I should say British rather than English, but you know, netball globally is a relatively small sport in terms of participation. Hockey is a relatively small sport in terms of participation. Even rugby,
Netball gets more funding
rugby
than
league
us.
is tiny. It's basically played in the north of England and the Greater Sydney area, basically. And I know I'm going to get rugby league people coming and telling me about various different islands in the Pacific and whatever. And I'm emphasizing for effect. But rugby union as well. Rugby union, relatively small sport globally, but you would think it was one of the biggest sports in the world, the way we cover it, and so on and so forth. There's literally loads of sports that are by metric smaller than basketball, but in this country we would have no idea whatsoever.
We had I suppose when this comes out, we had a politician on a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, again, exactly what he wasn't aware that in what we said in the UK, it's the second highest participation.
That's the other
sport.
Thing is, you've got to. People are being asked to explain the sport, explain the rules, and whatever. They're all playing it in school. Just because they stop at 16, that's to do with facilities and availability and cost and all of this, and badminton, right? They all learned how to play basketball at school. That's why it's the number 2 sport in school, because kids play it. So the idea that they don't have at least some grasp, okay, they may not know, you know, all of the minutiae of everything, but they know if the ball goes in, that's going to be 2 points. If it's behind that line, it's going to be 3 points. You've got to dribble it when you move. You know, they understand the very basic premise of it, in the same way that a lot of people who watch rugby understand the very basis of you know, what the scoring thing is. You've got to pass the ball backwards, you know, all of that sort of thing. We may not understand the dark arts of the scrummage and the ruck and maul, but we understand the basic principle of the game, which is why when I watch Six Nations or Premiership rugby or whatever, they don't explain it to me like I'm an idiot, even though I may well be an idiot.
You talk of badminton as a blight.
No, well, hang on, look, Dan, this is a really important question now, and I want you to think really carefully about your answer, because it may dent our opinion of you. Do you like badminton?
Look, here's my thing, right?
You sound like a politician now.
He sounds like he might.
He's going for
play
MP
I haven't
somewhere.
played badminton since I left school. I'm gonna put that one out.
Good answer.
Never knowingly played it. That's
the lines drive us all mad. We know all of that. But it's a reasonably popular sport into when you look at the amount of people who play it and what and all of that, and they got screwed over by the funding as well. So I did have a tinge of sympathy, and this is my dark and dirty secret. Which Olympics was it? It wasn't the last one. Was it the one before, where they won their target was 0 to 1 medal? They won 1 medal, and then they basically scrapped the funding for it because they went, that was a fluke, you'll never do it again. And it just laid bare the whole fallacy of UK sports funding. So I have had sympathies towards badminton on occasions, I will admit that, but in general, no, get the bloody lines off my call.
We actually went through the funding with this prospective MP, and it was some of it was embarrassing. We really need to get someone from who's going through all the funding, and just work it out, because it was things like fencing. It was getting more money than basketball.
Post London 2012, I spent many years banging on about this. And I used to know the data inside out, and I sort of ran out of steam for it in the end, and I don't know it as well as I once did. But the reality is, if you gave me UK sports premise, I would do exactly the same thing they're doing. I would, because if my premise was you've got a quarter of what is it? It's a third of £1 billion now, is it, or whatever it is, 300-400 million, whatever it is per cycle to spend on making us look really good every 4 years, every 2 years with the Winter Olympics. Then I would go, right, what are the easiest sports to win? How do we win as many medals as possible? And obviously it came out of the nadir of Atlanta in 1996 and sort of rose through to London with all the investment. What's the easiest way of winning? Well, there's 2 ways of doing it. Is one, you professionalize amateur sport because nobody else is doing it. So it won't take very much. It won't take much effort to get from last in the world to first in the world. If there's only 8 countries in the world that play that, I'm already 9th. I'm already 9th in the world before I even tried. So now I just have to get to it's like netball. Netball's biggest goal was to move from 4th in the world to 1st in the world, because they couldn't really fall below 4th in the world just on metrics. Obviously it's not an Olympic sport, so they don't get that funding. But so that's the first thing I would do, is go and find the low hanging fruit, the sports that nobody plays, and put a chunk of money into that, and it'd be easy. The second thing I would do is let's find the expensive sports, because that wipes out 2/3 of the world.
Cycling,
sailing, equestrian,
rowing,
canoeing,
all of these things that basically nobody in Africa, great swathes of Asia, most of South America don't play it because they're too expensive. So you're only really competing against Western Europe and North America in essence. So that would be my other investment, which broadly speaking is what we've done. And then team sports, just sack them all off, because you've got to spend so much money on winning 1 medal. What's the point of that?
Do you know what I think that includes athletics as well, because I love watching athletics, and sometimes you see the funding that the athletes get and you think, hang on, this seems like you're doing
the one
everything
exception with athletics
and
is you can get a Mo Farah. You can randomly have the best in the world, or a Jess Ennis. You can randomly have the best in the world at any given track or field thing, and therefore, Mo Farah basically used to hit the UK sport target on his own, didn't he? So it didn't really matter what the rest of the athletics team did. Mo's got it covered, and you lot try your hardest. Whereas we could have LeBron James, right? Peak LeBron James, and we still wouldn't win a medal at basketball, because
I'm glad you said peak LeBron James then.
Gary Bridlington.
Because simply the other 11 wouldn't be good enough to be carried by LeBron James on his own to beat the level of the depth of competitiveness. I mean, you look at France this year. The quality of the player that France are going to have in the Olympics, they might not win because the US team will beat them, and you know the French are going to have an unbelievably good team. And as I say, you look over the years, some absolutely amazingly good teams, but there's a ceiling to how far you can go because you've only got one of them versus Mo Farah.
Yeah.
One Mo Farah can win you a 10,000 and a 5,000. One LeBron James might get you to, you know, the quarterfinals or the semi-finals, if you're lucky, of Eurobasket, because you wouldn't even qualify for the Olympics. And therein is the challenge. So if going back to the point is, if I was UK Sport, I would do that. I don't believe that is the best use of our investment in sport as a nation. Personally, I would invest a little less money in sports we don't play and finish 4th in the medals table or 5th in the medals table rather than trying to get to 2nd or 3rd, just because I think that the trade-off for society would be so much greater. And I say this because I spent 11 years as a chair of governors of an infant school around the corner here, and whilst I was doing that was also the time where I'd spent a lot of time and effort looking at all of this funding, and I was just going, I can't offer rowing or sailing to the kids in my school. It's just not practical. So why are we spending all our money on things that they can't do? The winter sports, most of them you can't even do in this country. So who are we inspiring? Who are we inspiring to do sports we can't even play? You know, and the various other things where there's 40,000 people who participate in whatever sport it is. More people go to watch Newcastle United on a Saturday, and yet we're putting £6 million a year into whatever it is. Sort of, I'd rather they win a medal because they were the best at it and they wanted to be it, rather than they didn't quite make it in cycling or rowing, so we harvested them to do this winter sport instead because they had the right physique and therefore we won a medal in it, so we can say we won a medal. And again, it's about, to me, investment in sport should be about encouraging people to do it. So if they can't do it, what's the point? Getting kids active, super important, and getting adults active, really important as well. So it should be about getting old geezers like me running up and down and doing something so that we're not a drain on the social care system because we've mismanaged our diabetes that we've got because we've lived a sedentary life. And I just think if I was investing all of that money in sport, I would invest it in things that might have some impact beyond a little shiny medal. But here endeth are we in Purd, or am I not allowed to go all political now? Here endeth the soapbox.
You crack on. I mean,
I just had an amazing idea. This is amazing. We can do this as a 3-way. This is going to be amazing.
Last time I said that to myself, I had stitches.
Like, Dan mentioned that there's these really low-key sports where we can just say and we'll be like 9th in the world. Let's talk about it off air, but we find one of these sports we can be world champions in 4 years' time. We'll start playing.
You know
no
what?
one else is playing it in the UK.
I've always believed that everybody could have been elite at some sport had they been given the exposure to it. And I based this solely on a school trip I went on at the age of 10, where I did archery and I was really good at it. And I've never done archery since. And I reckon I'd have been a world champion if I was if my parents hadn't taken me to basketball and taken me to archery, I'd have been really good at it. And that's the thing.
Oh, we need to do the intro again. Dan.
I forgot the dude's name, but I'm so sorry for forgetting your name, although you may not listen, but I actually worked with the guy who was the GB indoor archery.
But it
channel,
is that thing.
funnily
It's that Matthew Syed
And,
thing about. I don't know if you ever read the Matthew Syed book of Bounce, where 3 of the top, whatever it is, table tennis players in the world lived in the same street, and it wasn't something in the water. It was just their local PE teacher was a big table tennis fan, so left the door to the whatever open so they could go play table tennis all day every day.
What a cool teacher. What a cool
Makes-
teacher.
that
And you
makes a
know
big
what?
difference,
You know what
doesn't
that says? That says
Facilities.
facility.
It's facilities. And
Always,
Oh, yeah.
we always
it is.
come into that.
Facilities and opportunity. And again, it goes back to the point I made earlier, where actually the numbers of people that play basketball are huge in terms of at school age, and then it drops off in adulthood. Well, it drops off in adulthood because they no longer have the opportunity to do it. And they no longer have the opportunity because there aren't the facilities, or if there are the facilities, they've got 8 badminton courts on them, which can have 4 people, which is 32 people versus the 20 that would play basketball. If you're lucky, it's probably more like 16. And just the economics of, well, if it's £2 each for the badminton players, how much is that divided times 32? 64 quid. So the basketball players have got to pay £5 each. It's simple economics. If I ran a local authority sports centre, I would do exactly the same thing as well. I'd have badminton, or I'd make my place look like the Worthing Leisure Centre.
No, I would stand my ground and say
And
no badminton lines. I'd have a.
It's
I'd run a support
availability.
group.
We've
to
said
give
we'd
up.
have
Where I live,
we'd have a badminton court in the car
there's
park.
5 or 6 tennis centres within 2 miles of here, so I could go play tennis whenever I want. There's God knows how many 5-a-side football pitches. There's indoor cricket stuff. There's rugby. Leicestershire's a big rugby thing. There's loads of rugby clubs around. It's dead easy.
So I went online and I started not making a spreadsheet, but I was putting a load of numbers in based on what FIBA was and looking down there, and it said some courts were listed.
The problem
in all
is, if
different
you get
rewards,
funding
I'm thinking,
from Sport England to build an indoor venue, you have to put the multi-court lines on. That is a stipulation. Even if you've got nobody who ever wants to play volleyball, for example, you still have to put the volleyball lines down. You have to put them all down, or they won't give you the funding. And I know this because when they built the Mattioli Arena, they had to put in a special dispensation to not have lines on the main court, because they were enough hours off the other 2 courts, blah 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 blah. And it's like, well, that's lunacy, because when they're giving out money to the local rugby club or cricket club to build the pavilion next to the field, they don't say, well, actually there's already a pavilion in the next field where they play cricket, and they play the cricket in the summer. You can play rugby in the winter. Use the same pavilion. We don't need 2. Nobody ever says that. Nobody ever says multi-sport. In the football all get their own football pitches. The rugby all get their own rugby pitches. The cricket all get their own thing. And
We
the
get
indoor
everyone.
sports, and it's not just us, but we're probably more afflicted than most. We have to go, oh well, you can have it, but you can only have it for 2 hours a week, because we've got this, that, and the other on it.
why don't the badminton courts have the the rollout mat like some places do, like
Yes,
Plymouth and
that's
stuff?
what we'll do. You get this
Yeah.
court, you get the rollout mat with all the lines on it, and then you put your basketball court on top. So you're kind of fulfilling.
Why
that
isn't
you've
there?
got
Why
the
isn't
lines there?
Why isn't
but they're
devil's
hidden.
advocate here, why isn't there a badminton only place? I'm sure there probably is somewhere, but I can't think of any. There's no.
Because
Burnt down by the basketball. Yeah, but
it had prolific
you know what I mean?
arson
What
attacks
indoor?
and,
Name an indoor sporting facility that isn't multi-line. They don't exist.
So what? One of there was an indoor one recently. When we were talking to the potential politician, one of the things we were saying was there was a local place, and we just gave it as an example to him and said, look, they were going to build something.
They
and
took
have a
over, didn't
small-
they? Badminton
small
took
indoor
over.
court, and they're losing their facility. And they said, well, we're going to put 2 indoor courts. They're like, well, that's not enough because there's an appetite for it. So the council and the areas use that as a reason to then say, oh, we won't build an indoor hall at all. So then you lose badminton and an indoor 3x3 court and everything. Because they said, oh, well, if you can't do it properly, we won't do it at all. You think,
and I get it. I do get
mean,
it because the funding of local government is a fraction of what it was 15 years ago, and they have to focus on children's social care, adult social care, all the statutory stuff. So it's quite easy to just go, oh, bugger this. But actually, it goes back to what is the point of all of this investment? And if we don't keep our adults active, we're building up problems. Health and social care, we see it already. Health and social care problems down the line, and that's why I just think sport is such a powerful vehicle to solve a lot of the, or not solve, but certainly assist in a lot of the challenges that society faces, and it's a little short-sighted not to use it at times, I think. Yeah.
Certainly for health and well-being. I know on Sport UK they always have, like, this is what we're aiming to do, as you said earlier, getting people involved, getting more people, get more bodies moving. But one of the things they never talk about is really like elite sport, if that makes sense. It seems that you can only have one conversation or the other. You can't say, we want elite athletes, we want to spawn the next UK talent. They're like, we want to get everyone active. You go, that's great. But what about someone who's like, when you have an education system, you say, these are the kids who have already got it. They're like hyper intelligent. So let's push them. Let's see what they can do. Let's see if we've got a Nobel Prize winner in there. Let's see what they are capable of, rather than let's get everyone on the same level. It's like, it's great that you've got that, but these are the things for it. And those conversations we kept running into always seem to be, oh, we didn't know that about basketball. Yeah. And as you said, it's the second most played team sport. And it's like, this isn't a surprise. We've had this for decades. Like, why are we still having that same, it's a surprise conversation?
One of my favourite parts of that show was a quote you said. What did you say?
I have no idea.
You said,
that
funded by men, something by many, funded by the few. Do you know the bit I'm saying?
I do, but, I can't remember what I did this morning. So.
But for the charity of many, funded by the few, something like that. We have to get that, because that was a great quote you said, summed up the whole thing.
But it's something to do with the volunteering and everything, because it's just every basketball runs by communities and by people and by the people who are surround it. And I think, I won't say not segue it, but if you're looking at when Dan's in full commentary mode and you're looking at that crowd, they don't need educating about what to do, do they? And how do you capture that? And I will say, I think this year the BBL did quite well in their media, trying to show to people, and I won't say show it without educating them in this is what you're doing, but made it seem like, hey, look at what you could be part of. Look at the atmosphere. Look at how many people are getting excited. I think they did some of those things quite well. Other things,
I'm just not a fan of the muting for the entertainment side of things. It gets to a certain point, mute.
We want to have the whole experience of being there, as much as you can. And having a sudden YouTube cut-off break is just like, what?
Especially when someone's about to shoot.
Oh,
you go, what? Dan,
that's
partly way off topic.
You got me on a hobby horse.
That was all your fault. No, I'm joking.
No, that's good.
I have got a question. This could be a conspiracy theory question, okay? And I don't think this happens in the UK, though you might be able to clarify this. But I don't know if you would, if it is a conspiracy or not. But
UFOs are real. That's right.
I question this when I'm watching NBA basketball, especially. When you're commentating, are you encouraged to agree with the referee's call?
No, definitely, yeah.
Do you know what I mean by when I say in the NBA?
Because the reality is that anybody who would do the encouraging probably doesn't know the rules as well as I do, for certain, but well enough. I have, over the years, defended referees because I think they get an unfair stick. And I think a lot of the time it's because we don't actually understand the rules. And as I say, I've sat with players who say one thing and I go, that's not actually the rule, but it's the rule in their mind. So therein is the challenge. But that doesn't mean that they don't get it wrong. And referees will admit they get it wrong.
Yeah.
They get it wrong far less frequently than the players do, by the way. They don't miss as many shots or turn the ball over as many times as the players do. So I do try, and I always have, even going back to when I was on the PA, I used to think it was very important, if a call is made and you can see people getting agitated to it and it's the right call, you explain why it's the right call. And I think definitely as a lead commentator, it's very important to when the referee's got it right, to explain it. Now, when he's got it wrong, I tend not to be this sort of, oh, I can't believe it, the referee, what a terrible decision, blah, blah, blah. I'm a bit more of a, don't know about that. You know, it's slightly less inflammatory than say other people would be. But that's just my style on it. But as I say, I think it's important that we do, when it is contentious, we have to look at it. But as I say, there's a lot fewer calls that are wrong than you would believe if you sat in a crowd. Because as I say, I go down to the Leicester games and I sit there and I've got people all around me going mad, and I go, what are you talking about? It's a travel. It was a blatant travel. What are you talking about? But because you're watching it through the prism of you wanting your own team to win, you can't see the rational side of it.
Is there a rule
Well, hang on, sorry.
people get wrong?
Same question, but for the American NBA.
Oh, for the
yeah,
Americans,
yeah.
I don't know. Probably.
Because that some of it is, rarely do they criticize the ref. I mean, look, they're professionals. They're gonna get it right majority of the time. But there's some where you're watching the replay and you go, man, that was the wrong call there.
I think, yeah.
And it's like the commentators will go, no, I think he made the right call. And bam, that's it. It's really obvious when it happens because subject gets changed really quickly.
I don't know if it's in the culture that actually the reactionary are the talking heads the next day, aren't they? Or in the studio and whatever. And actually the commentary team is a bit more buttoned up and down the middle. I guess it depends, because if you watch the nationally televised games, if you watch the locally televised games, they're incredibly biased and everything against their team is just an outrageous scandal, and we ought to take it up with Congress. But the nationally televised ones, I just think it's the style that they sort of grow into, that this is what we do and this is how we do it. But then Stephen A the next day tears them a new strip because that's what he does.
How it comes across sometimes when I'm watching on TV, you'll have the call, it's the NBA brand by the NBA referee, the NBA brand, the commentators, NBA brand. It's like, that's the right call. Yeah, let's move. And they move, now I've said it, they move on really quick and you think, what? Like, you can't remember that. I won't go into examples, but yeah, sometimes I don't see it in the UK, which is why I split the question, because I like the way they do it, where they'll question things and go and say it nicely.
It's that pyramid of one, though, isn't it?
Also, the one thing in defensive referees, everyone makes a mistake.
Of course,
and in fairness to the referees, they are making a decision.
Some makes mistakes for money.
Something has happened in a split second, and you got to make a decision. Like, split second. You wait a second, bam, it's gone. Saying we're moving on now. So I think it's incredibly hard what they're doing.
Yeah. Have you said about the rule book, Dan? Have you done like a coaching, or do you go on to that? Have you done any of that sort of
Dan,
learnt reffing?
Before you answer this question, just remember it was Los Angeles Laker legend.
Such a legend, you forgot.
What's his name? Shit. Coach.
Oh, I don't know that player.
Coach.
Pat Riley.
Showtime Lakers coach. Come on, who was it? Pat Riley. There we go.
Oh, don't
Pat
let him
Riley.
struggle. It's so
you
much
didn't
fun.
know. You didn't know.
We did a show on
why don't you
the
say it
Showtime
then?
Lakers.
So
because it's so much
Pat
fun.
Riley, he started out doing the colourful commentating.
No.
And then he went.
I'm shutting this one
It
down.
could
before we
happen.
go. No, but over the years, the various EuroLeague would do it every year. The BBL did it this year as well, where pre-season we would have a sit down with the head of officiating, and they would go through points of emphasis this year, any rule changes that may have happened, and with EuroLeague, any nuances that are different in EuroLeague versus FIBA rules. So that it was clear, and I know it was Richard Stokes at both of them at different times, and I know referees, and I will ask the question. And as I say, referees will come up to me and say, by the way, what you said last week about this or that was wrong, and I'll go, okay, why was that? Or I'll get a message, or I've had an email that said, this clip here, you said this wrong, but actually this is why you were wrong. And I thank them for doing that, because it's important for me, very important for me to get it right. So generally, I know what the rules are and why it would have been called that way or not. But on the occasions that I do get it wrong, I want to be corrected so I don't get it wrong next time. Yeah,
So
yeah.
you have that open dialogue with them?
Do you ever send one back going, yeah, you got that call
Actually,
I have. Well, I have to be careful how I say this now. I have once had a thing where we talked about a call where I explained what it said in the rule book, because that's the other thing is I'll go and look in the rule book and see, okay, that's what it says. I explained what it said, and when by what it's written down here, that can't be the right call because it doesn't follow the thing. And I had somebody confirm that I was right, but then when I saw the same referee not that long later, he explained to me why I was wrong, and I was thought, well, that's not what somebody else said.
thank you very much for listening to this episode. That is the end of this part, but do not worry, because coming soon is the second part of this episode, and it will be available soon.